Ira was better at music.
All right, everyone. Welcome once again to the Exit Your Way Roundtable. I am so excited today because we've got some special guests with us, and we are going to be talking about business buyer, seller, and advisor perspectives. This is something that we deal with every day, talking between business buyers, sellers, and Andrew and myself being advisors in this process. I'm pretty excited to share things with people about this and just understand and show everyone else the perspectives that we're going to hear. So first of all, I would like to introduce who's on the stage with us today. So Thomas Campbell, tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll get on to Darren after that.
Sure. So a little bit about me. I grew up in the Carolinas. Navy brat, both folks career officers. Went to school up at Babson in the Northeast, for those that know it. Got my MBA at UNC Chapel Hill, and spent the last decade plus operating and scaling small businesses in a variety of different industries. So everything from energy, infrastructure, tire recycling, manufacturing, e-commerce, fashion. Owned a yoga studio for a while, you name it. But largely in CFO and COO type roles. So decided if I was going to do it again, that I would do it for myself rather than somebody else. And as a result, kind of during my MBA, learned about the search fund model and kind of lit a fire under my ass to just go that route. So.
Cool. Oh, now Damon's out. Damon? Can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. So thanks, Thomas, for sharing that. Yeah, I hit the mic. I always mute so I don't echo. But thanks, Thomas, for sharing that. And we'll talk a little bit more about the search fund buyer process and that as we get into this. But Darren, tell us a little bit about yourself, Darren.
All right, thanks, Damon. 23 years manufacturer, a lot of school of hard knocks, manufactured heavy highway equipment all over the world. So we were in Japan, New Zealand, Australia, Middle East, Europe, all across North America, making big pieces of infrastructure building equipment, and recently sold my business at Christmas. So I'm happy to share any of that process with you and your listeners today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Darren, because I think this is going to be great. So Andrew, now people may know us at Exit Your Way. They know what we do. They've seen these things, but we are investment bankers, or if people would rather use the words business brokers. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. And another term for it is an intermediary. So
there you go.
It's a classic description, or M&A intermediary.
Yep.
We've seen several names for what we do. Business broker, M&A intermediary, investment banker.
Yep.
They're all the same kind of work, but at different levels. Really, the size of the deals. But and it is what it says it is. I mean, we help to facilitate. We represent the sellers in the business, and in this case, Darren is a business owner who's been through transactions, and I'm from that side of it, and Tom here is coming on to give us an idea what perspective is from the buyers who look at it too. So yeah, and as and our job is really, and we get buyers of all levels of sophistication and stuff like that too. But it's helping to both parties to kind of understand how the process works. What each side is looking for, because it is a challenging, very difficult process, and there's different mindsets on both sides. So.
Yeah. No doubt. Well, thanks for that, Andrew. So I'm going to start out the question, and we're going to ask both of you this. So Thomas, from your perspective, what was your biggest concern going into the process? I guess what did you think was going to be your biggest challenge?
So my biggest concern was, I think the risk involved of not doing it right and not knowing what I didn't know. So, I've spent my entire career in these companies operating, I had plenty of confidence in my ability to run a company, but I'd never really gone through a formal M&A process of, diligencing company and, getting it to a close. And so what I didn't want to run into was, worst case scenario, either not being able to find a good business because I didn't know the best practices for running a search process, or even worse than that, spoiling the opportunity because of my lack of knowledge or inexperience in diligencing these companies and having it fall through as a result. So that going in, I think, was one of my biggest concerns and why I kind of went the single sponsor route and took the approach that I did. That being said, certainly I think definitely no longer concerned. I got through that pretty quickly once I got into it.
Yeah. Yeah. So okay, so we'll stop there on that one. So first of all, and back to this too, what kind of companies are you targeting in your search process so people better understand that?
So, the type of companies that typically searchers are aiming for are those that are kind of foolproof, for lack of a better term. They have really high quality revenue, meaning it's either very highly repeat or recurring. And there's a big difference between, a company that has best case example being a software company where you've got monthly recurring revenue, sometimes contractual on one end of the spectrum. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got project-based companies where you've got consultancy and you may wrap up a project and then you have to find a new customer. So most searchers are trying to aim somewhere on the other end of the spectrum where even if it's not monthly recurring, they've got annual contracts in place to go out and perform inspections, or they've got highly repeat business revenue. Second, thing to be looking for would be risk profile. Are there any existential risks to the company? In most cases, one of the bigger ones would be customer concentration, right? So if you lose a customer, does that kill the business? Other risks, though, would be stroke of the pen. If the industry is exposed to state or federal government changing a law, does that ruin the business? And in the case of like healthcare, for instance, if Medicare for all were to come to pass, what would that do?
Yeah.
As an example, and then other risks would be vendor concentration, contractual, what have you. So that's the other thing that we'll be looking for. And then, lastly, it's just kind of, is it something where, one other major risk I should mention is the family and or key man risk in the business. So the owner has been running this thing for 20 years. If he leaves, what does that do to customer relationships and or the employee relationships? Do they have a lot of family members in the business that potentially could leave? Are they playing golf with their customers on a regular basis? And that's really
Yeah.
business exists.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff, Thomas. I mean, it's great to listen to your perspective. And I see Darren going and he's like, yep. I had those questions that he didn't. So Darren, from your standpoint, what was your biggest concern going into it? And then the same thing back to you. What are some of the things that came up that you didn't really anticipate?
Where the hell were you guys 2 years ago? Even with Thomas talking now, I'm still taking notes going, why didn't I know all this stuff 2 years ago? And again, that would probably be my answer to the question is one of the biggest concerns I had going into it was alignment and understanding that the seller had my needs in mind. And I think it kind of diluted the process a bit as I was I didn't have a coach to guide or a Sherpa to guide me through the process. So everything I had to discover was literally a punch in the face every step of the way. because again, it was the buyer that was coaching me. So that was a challenging process. And the other thing, like I said, is making sure that there was alignment. And I think I was a little blind to it because I was so passionate about the business and the opportunity that I wasn't taking a step back and going, I just got a $2.5 million contract with Japan. Why is nobody jumping up and down excited about this? It's risk. And I'm going, no, it's Japan. Like, this is the best thing ever. And the other party was looking back going, it could be risk. And I'm going, no, we've got export insurance. We can do the following things. And the things I was getting excited about, the seller was not necessarily looking for. So for me, the big thing is making sure there's an alignment. So you're not 17 steps down the process and you realize that, wait a second, are my employees going to be safe going forward? That self-doubt that comes later on in the process. So I think two things very early on would be, how do we identify what we care about and what they care about, so we can have some alignment on what the goals are, and how quickly can we discover that before it comes out, after you've both been working on it for 6 months going, I don't think this is blanking going anywhere because we have too much of a gap. And that's on behalf of the buyer and the seller.
That is great. And I mean, Andrew, just what do you think about this, Andrew, as an advisor in this process, listening to these two explain their different perspectives?
I mean, this is awesome that we get to, kind of bounce back and forth between the two, so you can really see the different perspectives on both sides, because this is not something you get to see. And this is one of the reasons a seller like Darren runs into this trouble, is because, these are privately held companies. These transactions are not in the press. They're not publicly traded companies. They don't have requirements. We're all under confidentiality. No one wants things to find out. So it's really hard to get information. Information, gets people to relax, especially about risk. I mean, the more you know about it, the better. So it's really that's another thing about it on that factor. But, so this is, we like to really open up that and educate, to help people get deals, and so you can share and see these experiences. But I mean, this is fantastic because, I mean, Darren's been selling his services, product, his companies, for years and years and years. But, we're not selling, and this is a very typical situation we run into. We're not selling your product or service and all the things you get excited about. We're selling your business now, and the customer is different. And they're not looking to buy the product. And so many times I come into, when we start working with a client, you're right, we have to kind of guide them through, stop selling the product, because you can't turn that off very easily because you've been doing it for 20 years. And you're passionate about it. We're not selling the product, we're selling the business.
Yeah,
now.
Nobody seemed to care. Nobody seemed to care how many soccer games I missed and how many birthdays I missed and how many things I screwed up that had to go back and fix the next day. That really didn't show up in our balance sheet.
Yeah.
But I cared.
Well, Thomas has an MBA, and you have an MBA too that you earned through trial and error and the School of Hard Knocks. And the difficult part is the perspective from the buyer coming in on Thomas's side. And search funds are really interesting because the buyer itself is going to be active in the business. They're looking for a business to step into and run and take over from the owner who's exiting. So that's a unique type of situation rather than the next level up, like an equity group that's strictly buying it for an investment, but with investor money and capital to put into it. And that's a whole different animal. Your organization is run like that than it is run. Now you got boards to answer to. You've got weekly things and metrics and processes to be written out. Whereas most of the stuff Darren, is up here. And you're gonna need to know. I mean, that kind of stuff. But when people start taking other people's money and putting it into it, you got to answer to somebody that it becomes a job.
Yeah, it might be worth just mentioning too that there are different views of those risks and what's important between the different buyers, right? So my risk as an individual buyer is, this is it. Like, I've got one shot, make or break my career potentially. Whereas a strategic or private equity buyer is looking at things a little differently. So a strategic buyer who's already in the space may look at, Darren's Japan deal and be just as thrilled as he is, because they see the opportunity that it means for their own products and services, and they also understand, the risks and costs and whatnot. And likewise, if it does fall apart, customer concentration wise, they are pretty well established within the space. They'll survive. They'll be just fine, and they can make it up elsewhere.
Yeah.
Whereas me as an individual buyer, that's, one of those existential risks. Where if that deal falls through, you've already invested a bunch of capital and have a bunch of overhead riding on that contract, then you're in for a pretty hard time.
Yeah. That is interesting, and it's a great perspective to share as a buyer. You've got, and especially a search fund buyer, you are putting it on the line, and that's where the diligence that comes in is going to be maybe a little bit more focused and different.
I think for the benefit of the audience, maybe we should explain,
Go ahead.
Yeah. Do you want to do that?
Go ahead. Thomas? All right.
Sure. Yeah. So search fund essentially is now kind of what a lot of people refer to as an individual buyer, really. And it comes in three different forms. You've got the traditional, which is a structure where, a individual like myself goes out, sources a bunch of capital, investors, high net worth individuals, sometimes boutique private equity, what have you, and with the goal of going out, spending 2 years where they're paying themselves a salary, hiring analysts or two, interns, office space, everything, to hunt for a business to buy that fits their investors and their investment criteria. With the goal being that when they find something they like, they go back to their investors, raise additional equity, close on the business, and become CEO. And then from there, they get 25%, give or take, sweat equity in business that vests in 3 tranches. 1/3 at close, 1/3 as a vested over time, sticking around 4 or 5 years, and 1/3 as after hitting a performance hurdle. Kind of another version of that traditional model is a single sponsor model, which is kind of the route that I went, where instead of having a dozen different investors backing you, that you have to go back and re-raise capital from when you find a good business, you have a single, either family office or small boutique private equity group backing you. And the advantages there are institutional knowledge and training that they have, pre-existing database resources, vendor relationships, what have you, to facilitate that deal. And you're getting a lot more of their time, attention, and money during your search process. And likewise, from a buyer's perspective, a seller's perspective, it's better because not only is there committed capital where the money's already there, you don't have to go and raise it, but it's also you're dealing with a much more, organized and proficient buyer team with lots of deal experience typically under them. And then the final and most common search fund, quote unquote, is really just the self-funded searcher. And that's somebody who's got their own or family wealth and means, and they're typically looking to buy a business using an SBA loan as financing. Oftentimes a little bit smaller, maybe looking more for kind of a quality of life type business where, landscaping or HVAC, where it's just kind of steady as it goes. But yeah, definitely, those types of searchers, quote unquote, have been around for ages before the term even existed, but now we just call them searchers.
Yeah. Well, this is awesome hearing this, Thomas. And there's one thing you said that I want to make sure everyone understands is committed capital. Now, this doesn't matter if you're if you're selling a $50 million company or a $1 million company, then someone comes in saying they're a search fund buyer. Committed capital, the difference between not having committed capital and having committed capital is already said they will invest if you find a business that meets these criteria or these rough criteria, and they've committed that money to you, rather than you've talked to 17 people and they said, oh yeah, if you find the right thing, I'll put in whatever. But can you explain the difference from your perspective, Thomas, so everybody understands the committed capital or having to go out and basically raise capital once you've found a deal?
Yeah. So the difference is frankly pretty huge when it's
Yeah.
a deal done. So the non-committed capital means that, you've got a buyer who really may or may not have the money to buy a business. They don't know themselves. No matter how enthusiastic they may be, no matter whatever sales pitch they may be giving you, at the end of the day, they, as you alluded to a while ago, have to go out there and, do their own sales pitch and roadshow to their investors and potentially other investors to kind of get their buy-in on, yes, this is a great investment and I will fork over $250,000 or whatever it might be to, buy a couple units in this business. Committed capital, on the other hand, means that really I've only got to convince a couple other partners. And at that point, they go to their investors and say, okay, pay up. You've already agreed to buy whatever we found. Well, we found something. Now, you need to cut that check. And, it's kind of how traditional private equity works. But it makes a huge difference in terms of both the amount of time that the buyer is spending raising capital. Like I'm working with these two guys pretty much every step of the way anyway. They're already read into it. It doesn't really require any additional effort on my end to raise capital. You don't have to do a roadshow. So I can spend that time focused on diligencing your business, building a rapport with you as the seller, and closing the gap on any negotiating items that may be there. So it really speeds up the diligence process, reduces the risk in buying it, and likewise, it does mean oftentimes that you do have an established group behind you where you know exactly who you're working with on the other end versus a bunch of investors that just may have recently gotten to know the searcher or have not really spent that much time getting to know the searcher.
Yeah, great points. Great points.
Of course, that's one of the first questions we ask when a buyer comes and is interested in buying the business, is where the money, where it is and where it's coming from. But when we hear it's committed capital, yeah, it's a huge advantage. Obviously, it's hard enough to sell a business to one buyer, let alone having to go through and convince a panel of other people that you have to get through to get to the finish line. So
yeah, and that's a great point, Andrew, because you are you in that situation, you're selling the business 2 or 3 or 10 times, because it's not just that the person leading the search and the buyer, the individual, they have to then sell it to all their investors, which, as Thomas pointed out, is a much riskier process. So,
well, we really like search fund buyers, even if they don't have committed capital. Anyways, I mean, the model, because they fit and they solve unique problems. Most of our clients now are baby boomers and are not going to, they're done. They're not going on more into the business. The family isn't taking it over. Darren, you gotta be, you've got to be replaced. And that's what the search fund offers that's different than the investor buyers too. I'm much more willing to put my investor money behind a guy like Thomas, because that mitigates my risk. I'm comfortable that, when you leave and that risk happens, that we have a good operator who can come in and keep the culture going and keep doing what you've been doing on that handoff. So
yeah.
And one thing I will say too, if I spoke a little too harshly on the traditional model, that wasn't an intent here, but there's a lot more professional search fund investors now than there used to be, right? It used to be just pure, high net worth individuals investing in the space. Now you have established boutique private equity that are very proficient investors and provide their searchers with a great deal more support than they have been in the past.
And now we've seen that.
It's better than the old days when the guy would come in and say, yeah, my uncle's going to help me buy it.
Yeah.
That's the first flag.
Yeah. So let's switch back to Darren here, because Darren, how long did the process take from the time you talked to this buyer and you got the deal closed?
Yep.
I think you're on mute.
Still on mute there. There we go.
There we go. Almost a year.
Almost a
Yeah.
year.
And the biggest thing that I discovered through the process is that there were so many, like, just even on the buyer side, there was 2 legal firms, there was 2 accounting firms, just trying to get everyone to work together. There were so many people that told me how right they were. And I'm going, I don't need one party to be right. We want to have a process where everybody wins. So quite a few times I found myself actually wrangling in professional services to make sure things that were should be flowing were actually flowing. Really good example of something that surprised me, though, was delays in the process. So in the middle of it, and it's just stuff you don't think about, had to do an environmental assessment, and that took 2 months.
Yeah.
And you're going, I didn't think about that, but anyway, we're good.
Yeah.
So stuff like that, just pre-planning and understanding that flow and that process, very important, because typically people like me, you're making 100 decisions a day, you're go, 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 and all of a sudden, hey, we're on hold for 2 months for an environmental assessment. I just wasn't expecting that to take so long to dig a hole, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
So where did that come from, Darren? The environmental, did that show up in diligence? Was that a request or a requirement from their side? Or how?
So somebody had a.
Yeah, it was part of the diligence.
Yeah, it was just things that needed to be done.
Yeah. Then that's common. I mean, and as you bring up a great point, because we were working with a client a few years ago that their industrial property was encroached by an adjacent fuel depot that had spilled some fuel on it, and it leaked into their stuff, and the other place was totally responsible for it. But the people buying were, as you said, they wanted to make sure, A, that it was cleaned up, B, that there was clear legal agreements, that it was not their, the other businesses thing. And yeah, it's these kind of things are typical that show up. And one of the things that I was going to talk about, I wanted to ask kind of both of you about is it. I've talked a lot in if people look at a post or two of mine about customer concentration or vendor supplier concentration, key employment concentration, if you got one person makes the business kind of thing. And my thought is around, like, Darren, as a person that runs a business for 10, 15, 20 years, you have time to build that comfort level with, hey, I've got one client that buys 80% of my stuff and they are great. And you don't even understand, that's really not a risk that plays into your daily thoughts that much anymore. And then, from Thomas's side, that's like an almost oh shit moment, just to be honest, that it's could be the one that that kills you. So do you think I'm out of bounds by that, Darren?
Yeah, I don't mind touching on that, because I would say to any business owner that I work with today, that should be your priority, whether you're thinking of selling or not. So lots of companies I worked with in the past, in places like the oil sands, and the oil sands take a dip, and you go, did you realize while you were making money hand over fist, you had one egg in one basket? So this goes a lot back to why we were doing business in other countries, because I found the more product I would send to the Middle East, the more sales would go up in the US. It was weird. So the other thing that we were doing was ensuring that we were not just sticking to one industry as well. So the biggest bread and butter we would have for 60, 70% of the business was in road building. So we were concentrating our efforts into getting into agriculture, into mining, into other types of activities, because margin's margin at the end of the day. And again, I found that one thing, if you were successful in one of those areas, that would actually propel sales in the other area, because what happens is your sales team gets all excited going, oh, we got a big order to Japan. I better get all my orders in for Utah. Yeah. So those are things that owners should be doing on a daily basis. I'm currently working with 3 small, anywhere between the 10 and 50 million mark manufacturers, and we're talking 67, 71, and 77 years of age. And you're exactly right, is how dependent are you on these 6 customers? And, all of a sudden you have one issue, like, I don't know, COVID hitting, and you're going, now we're in trouble. So it is something in there to say it's best business practice, whether thinking of selling or not.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great perspective. And I love the fact that, you've been through the process, sold a business, and now you're helping others, in their plans, whatever their future might be. And that is one of the bigger things you talk about.
I'll share with you a very, very real story that happened to me last week. Company probably around the 11 million mark. The owner is 6'7". We started working together in the last year, I would say, even while I was in the transition process. And the biggest thing that I felt from somebody else's viewpoint that wasn't my own, who was living it, was at that age, and I think at any age, sometimes you feel like you've lost control.
Yeah.
And the big thing for the owners of these businesses is you feel good when you feel like you're in control and you have choices. And getting back to that point, you can feel much more comfortable the day you decide to. So you didn't have like a health risk or something tragic happened that scared you into making a knee reaction that was, poorly planned out. So ultimately, I would come back to the first comment I made to all 3 of you. As long as you have a decent guide or Sherpa to take you through the process, the seller starts to feel in control again. They understand what their business is and where the value is, and they're able to make good choices. So I couldn't say that enough, is that we love feeling like we're in control and we have choices. The day we don't, we back away and we go in a different direction.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point, Darren. And I'm going to let Thomas give us his perspective on risk like this, because, you're coming into it as a buyer, and man, what does it look like when you come into a company and you got, 70% of the revenue with one customer?
Yeah, unless there are some really strong mitigating factors, like this customer has multiple decision makers, so it's spread out across like a bunch of different plants. There's no competition in the space, so they're basically having to buy from you. There's no other choice. Unless there's things like that, typically that's a deal killer.
Yeah.
At that point, it's just like, yeah, like I said, this is make or break for me. If that one company or customer gets a new purchasing manager, if they hit hard times because of COVID or oil prices or whatever, that's it for me. The company, I'm also buying this business with, a certain amount of leverage.
Yeah.
And that adds risk that I've, certainly the seller may not have to worry about, but I do. Because if I'm not able to make those debt service payments, then, I'm in bankruptcy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good point, Darren. From the seller's perspective, you're living with that risk, but you're not levered out in having to pay debt, for the next 5 years going forward, which is what they're stepping into, and also stepping into a business that, you've been running it for 20 years. You just learn to live with it. There are exceptions, what Thomas is talking about. Aerospace, automotive companies, in 98, their big customers are, one of the big 3 or Boeing, or, they've got a history of, that's just that's the nature of that business. So customer concentration is, but, they've been suppliers and are locked into that for a long time. And some government contractor type businesses as well. But for the most part, they're very common in manufacturing. Tied in oil too, and gas. It's kind of the life they live. But what I wanted to point out too is this is the problem with this market, you're selling businesses, it doesn't make you a bad company.
No.
You're making money. You've been making it for years and all that kind of stuff. But I want to say, so, it comes back to the question, what's the valuation then of the company? In most markets, you just go, okay, yeah, that's fine. It is a problem with the product we're selling, so we reduce the price. But we don't have that here. This is zero sum.
Yeah.
It's a no-go. Then what do you?
No, and to echo a couple of Darren's comments too, I think it is a process, and sellers are often best served if they start that process, a few years before they actually intend to sell. Figure out your advisory team, start gearing your company up, reducing that customer concentration. Oftentimes sellers, when they've been in it for 30 years or whatnot, they let their foot off the gas because they're like, yeah, I'm getting older. I don't really got a nice quality of life. That's the opposite of what you should be doing. If you're getting your company ready to sell, you should be showing a steady growth trend. Trying to get in the buyer's mindset and taking care of those risks, whether it's reducing key man risk or otherwise, to, get a better valuation and make it an easier process just in general for everybody.
Yeah.
So,
Great stuff.
Too, because it doesn't even need to be, you do need to, this is what Exit Your Way is all about. We come into clients, and that's the first thing we want to identify, is because it's a very common thing to have this customer concentration, especially with small businesses. And it's just that you at least have to show one way to mitigate that risk is to show that you are deploying resources within your organization, and it's business development, either getting into a new market, getting different new clients and that kind of stuff. And if you get show a track record of, hey, we know this, we're working on it, then you might be able to get Thomas to rethink about this as at least, we may still have a customer concentration problem, but they've been acquiring new customers, they're into a new market, whatever you need to do, but it's got to be, that strategy needs to be there.
Yeah.
And they see it. Yeah.
So Darren, I'm gonna give you, and it's for whatever reason it's saying we don't have a connection. So if you can't hear me, we'll just move on. But what is one thing you would do differently if you were to do it over? Oh, he might be dead this time.
You can hear me, Damon?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
All right. I think if you guys already nailed it. In the future, and this is what I've been now talking about with the manufacturers that I'm working with, I'll question them on their age, and then I'll just say, listen, if you got 3 years for me, because what we need to do is work on that gap in the next 3 years from now, because that's what people care about. And coincidentally, that gap is what you should care about. Your top line, bottom line are pointed in the right direction. And again, if we can get these things in place, these are the things that people care about. I'm not a financial person by any means, but I get really excited about the results from our efforts.
Yeah.
I have conversations with business owners about what actions do you need to take to change the trajectory of what's happening, because someone's going to look at your last 3 years and say your bottom line starting to creep on your top line. That doesn't look good. Well, you need to understand, and I said it doesn't really matter in the selling process. Someone's going to see that what I just seen within minutes and go, there's not the multiplier here you thought there was. So what I get excited about in speaking with manufacturers is what can you do today to change that? So that's what really starts getting my heart pumping, is saying, how do you actually grow that margin and put those systems in place so you can feel like you're in control? So the day someone decides to approach you, or you decide to approach someone else, you still feel like you're in control.
That's awesome. I'm sitting here just grinning, dude, because it is what you guys have just said. It's summed up so much of what we like to tell people and understand. And it's nice hearing other people's perspectives on it, because one of the things that you touched with, Darren, I think is very, very relevant for business sellers to understand is, this is going to be a process where you're going to feel like you're not in control, when the rest of your life in your business, you've been many times in control of most things. And that's where I think,
100%.
yeah, that's a feeling that's not different. But if you're doing like you say, and you're talking about, and you get the financials and the KPIs rolling in the business, and understanding how, a monthly review of financials after the sale, that gives you a lot of comfort in the fact that yes, there may be a seller note that you've got to be, but you're involved in a board meeting or whatever it is, or get the monthly financials, and you understand how the company's being running. But these kind of things, the control factor is something that cannot be understated in this process, because it's so different from your normal operation of the business.
Yeah. Yeah. Darren, his experience there is great, because, again, too, he switched and started to work and understand and drive his decisions and run his business towards building his equity, rather than just running the cash flow and how do we do at the end of the month. And now looking at how that affects the equity that you're building in the company, and that significantly changes things. So now you do it. And that's how you get a business sold.
So Andrew, I will be very, very careful with this. I don't want you to think I'm intelligent. I was very scared shitless. I would meet with my competitors in Ohio, and again, they, hundreds of millions of dollars. They're next to the customer. They're next to the supply chain. And I would meet with the owner and say, listen, you're big and mighty. I'm only at the 50 million mark. You guys are massive and insignificant. And they would share everything with me and say, listen, we're happy with 5 to 7% margin. And I would go, oh my God, me literally getting materials to where my factory is, that model will not work.
Yeah.
So everything we did, we had to change that model for margin.
Yeah.
It was, I'm very passionate about ensuring manufacturing isn't a race to the bottom. And again, exactly as we're talking about today, you can't let so many things restrict you that you end up feeling like you're getting really, really good at building something nobody wants to pay you for. I hate feeling like I'm stuck in a corner. And I think other manufacturers my size usually feel that way, is that they love it when they have choices and options.
Yeah. That's great, Darren. I guys, we could go on here for a long time, but I just want to say we're gonna wrap up here now, and I just want to say thank you, because it has been awesome having you guys on here. Andrew, your thoughts on this conversation?
I think this is fantastic. You really, because you just don't get to see this every day. These conversations, what Darren's learned in his career, you can't learn that in business school. I mean, you've got an MBA, Thomas, but you know what he's learned there, and it's too bad. However we can get that out, and that's great education for anybody who's in business.
Yeah, and then Thomas, you're educating us on your perspective, because it's so different than the long-term business owner. It's so great. It's so great to hear this. So I just wanted to say thank you, everyone. So if you're listening to us live on LinkedIn, we're going to stop on LinkedIn, and we're going to go back to the tables here for a few minutes so people have time to talk for a minute and wrap things up. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks, because we're doing this the first and third Thursdays of the month. So our next one is on October 7th, I believe it is. And we're going to be talking about business valuation fundamentals. So thanks for joining us on LinkedIn. We're going to go off there, and we're going to go back to the tables here on Remo and just talk for a bit and wrap things up.